And then the other area where Saudi Arabia has become so important in the United States is in propping up the military-industrial complex. And that is through the most massive weapons deals that you could imagine. I think it's remarkable that we have not spent more of our time and more of our energy on disclosing how many weapons have been sold to this regime just under the Obama administration alone. There have been 42 different deals. 42 different deals worth $115 billion. Now, a lot of us have worked on the Israel-Palestine issue and been lobbying against the $3 billion a year that goes of our tax dollars to the Israeli military. Multiply that times 8, that's $24 billion. This is $115 billion of sales to the country most responsible for spreading extremism. So what the hell is this all about? Drain the swamp. If you look at what the Saudis have done with the weapons, I mentioned that they have been supporting, and with weapons, al-Qaeda groups in Syria, Iraq, Libya. They have also been using the weapons to crush democratic uprisings that came about during the Arab Spring, particularly the one next door in Bahrain, where there was a beautiful, non-violent occupation that started, where the people were really excited that they were going to be able to join their neighbors in other Arab countries that had overthrown dictatorships, until the Saudis came in with US tanks and crushed that uprising. And then we have the situation in Yemen, which is the most underreported war going on right now. Our media barely talks about it at all, and yet for the last 20 months now, the Saudis have been pounding this very poor country into a state right now that not only are there thousands and thousands of innocent people have been killed, but the infrastructure has been destroyed. The water system, the sewer system, there's an outbreak of cholera right now. Doctors Without Borders, hospitals and clinics have been destroyed. There have been a study showing that a third of the targets have been civilian targets of marketplaces and residential neighborhoods and weddings and funerals and schools. And this is all done not only with US weapons, it couldn't be done at all without US support, because the US is doing all the maintenance for all of these weapons. We're even refueling the planes in the air. We are giving them targeting support, all kinds of logistical support, as well as diplomatic cover. And it is only finally with some more exposing by groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, the devastation, and the UN calls it a catastrophic situation, that finally we've managed to get some people in Congress to speak out. And finally we managed to get a vote in the Senate. And you would think, given all of this, we could get 100 senators who might stand up and say, enough is enough. No, we got 27 senators. We couldn't even get Dianne Feinstein to vote against weapons sales. And so one of the things I hope that we can do as a result of this is to at least make a call to Dianne Feinstein's office and with the very simple message of no more weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. And the other thing to understand about Saudi Arabia is that there are a lot of people who are fighting very courageously to change the government in a more democratic fashion. There are also people trying to blow things up inside Saudi Arabia. It's like the Frankenstein child that has been created. The ISIS and the Al-Qaeda have come back to haunt the Saudis, blowing things up inside Saudi Arabia. And it was only then that the Saudi government started cooperating with the US on issues like counterterrorism against ISIS. But in the meantime, the real Democrats inside Saudi Arabia have either been executed, are in prison, or are trying very hard to find other non-violent ways to make change. And they say, look at what's happening around the region if there is a violent overthrow of the Saudi regime, things will be worse. It will be way worse, because there is no civil society to come in through that vacuum. And it will be malicious. It will be like a Libya situation. And that's why they feel very desperate to make reforms. What kind of reforms? Well, I mentioned that the women are signing petitions calling for lifting of the guardianship system. There are people who are trying to get who want a simple thing like a constitution. They have been meeting with the more open-minded princes to try to lobby the king to say, we are an absolutist monarchy. There are constitutional monarchies all over the world. And like the UK, where they love their royalty and has a great symbolic value. But there's a constitution and there's a rule of law. So they are trying to say, let us move towards a constitutional monarchy. There are the Shia in the eastern part of the country who are constantly fighting just to be treated like equal Saudi citizens. So these are the people that our government should be supporting, and not supporting the quote, kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And there, that moves me to really get back to saying, what are we going to do about our military-industrial complex? What are we going to do about our complicity, like Pope said when he was here, that these weapon sales are drenched in blood, and that we are complicit if we don't stand up against the arms industry. And so, with a Trump in the White House, and even if it were Hillary Clinton in the White House, we've got to find more ways to do that. We had one success standing up to the cluster bombs makers. You might know that this is a particularly pernicious weapon that is known to break up into bomblets that are often left on the ground unexploded and explodes when children pick them up. And that's why the international community banned cluster bombs. The United States did not sign on to that treaty. There was a U.S. company in New England that kept making cluster bombs.
Pennsylvania.
Huh?
Textron in Pennsylvania.
Right, in Wilmington, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. I mean, they have their headquarters in one place, and then they have their manufacturing place in another place, and the Quakers have been protesting them for quite a long time. When it came out that these weapons were being bought by the Saudis and used in Yemen, we ramped up the protests and had them more regularly outside the production facilities, outside the headquarters, and put a lot of pressure in Congress. By a very narrow margin, we lost a vote in Congress, but enough pressure to get President Obama to put a halt on the sale of cluster bombs, and most importantly is that Textron announced that it would no longer be producing cluster bombs. So that's one example of a good campaign that actually had some results. But I'm thinking that we could do something like the fossil fuel industry, activists have been doing, of trying to divest from the fossil fuel industry, and have been very successful in getting massive amounts of money out of the fossil fuel industry. Shouldn't we be doing a similar thing around the weapons industry? And I will just end by looking again at sort of this larger picture of Trump. And we know that before Trump won the election, I said that our peace movement was pretty weak. But there are amazing, strong movements, like the movement for Black Lives, like the heroic stand of the indigenous people in Standing Rock, the immigrant rights community, a very vibrant community. All of this is going to merge now as we move into the Trump era. And I think we saw a lot of that during Bernie Sanders' campaign, when so many different issues came together. Unfortunately, he wasn't strong enough on the foreign policy issues, but he did bring a lot of our issues to the fore, and it was so exciting to see not only older folks going for Bernie, but how much he appealed to a young population that is now, some of them deciding to work to change the Democratic Party from the inside. Among the issues they're trying to do is get Keith Ellison, the congressman from Minneapolis, to be the next head of the Democratic national committee, which would be quite revolutionary for the Democratic Party. Others deciding to work on the outside. But whatever it is, we see after Donald Trump was elected, the massive numbers of young people from high schools, from colleges that have been out on the streets every single day since he was elected. And there are so many new coalitions that are forming that my head is spinning. I live in Washington, D.C. right now, and already we see that the day before the inauguration, somebody has rented the entire African American Museum to do a peace ball, which holds over 3,000 people. We are all calling for protests on Inauguration Day, both locally as well as nationally. The day after, this woman put up on a Facebook page, a Million Woman March, and all of a sudden she had like hundreds of thousands of women that wanted to come, overwhelmed. There are a big broad coalition that's come together to say we need to have massive, well-planned protests for 100 days after Trump is in power. So we have a new progressive movement that is just formed like this. And it is not broken down into the silos of this is the environmental group, this is the peace group, this is the racial justice group. It really is about peace and justice issues. And so I think your center will obviously be growing and have lots and lots of new connections to make, and this is being replicated all over the country. So while we do take some time to continue to wallow a bit in our despair about the Trump presidency, let's remember that out of crisis comes opportunity, that out of the McCarthy era came things like the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, and this is our time to make sure that something good comes out of this present crisis. So, thank you. People can get the book if you want to pay the full $15 price. You can go on Code Pink, and that way you'll also be helping Code Pink. And if you want to go the little bit cheaper route, you can go to Amazon and get it at a bargain. I give you the options. So, yes, and I hope you do buy the book because it is very readable, but very essential information.
I think you can also go, maybe no longer on the Code Pink website and order 5, right? 5 for $50, something like that. It's cheaper, and then that's the activist price, and then you could give them to friends or sell them.
Right, and the center can buy them for $10, even cheaper than Amazon.
Right.
And give them as gifts to your major donors for the
Or
holidays.
raffle.
Yeah.
I think that some of the people here weren't at the rally on Wednesday night, but weeks before the election, we planned a rally for the day after the election with the goal in mind to get as many issues represented as possible, because we knew, regardless of who was elected, that we had to begin pressuring hard. It turned out to be a very successful rally with lots of people, and we got more people on the mailing list for the Peace Center. There was a debriefing on Saturday. There have been marches every night. People really stayed a long time to try to figure out how they could work together with all of the issues coming together. So even when San Jose was not voted for activism or big marches, it's beginning. And I hope that helps you take part. And it helps all of us, because there were a lot of people there whom I didn't know and had never seen. And I'm sure that was true for others. The spirit was great.
Excellent.
I have a question on the sort of government and its relation, well, let's say AIPAC and Israel have taken a really aggressive approach to Iran. Not so much with Saudi Arabia. What is your take on that?
Well, AIPAC is a group that actually has not only a lot of money and a lot of influence, but it also has layers. It is very grassroots. It has people on the ground that it can mobilize in communities. The Saudis don't have that. They have money. So they lobby behind the scenes, whereas some of these others were more visible. But AIPAC, representing the government of Israel's position, had the same position as the Saudis, which is we do not want the United States to get close to Iran. And so we don't want this nuclear deal to go through. We want to be pressuring the US that they should be bombing Iran's nuclear facilities. So traditionally, the Saudis and Israelis have not had diplomatic relations. Saudi Arabia was part of the Arab boycott of Israel. The one decent foreign policy of Saudi Arabia has been traditionally supporting the Palestinians, giving a lot of money to Palestine, although a lot of that money was to build these gigantic mosques all over the place. But also was part of coming up with an Arab peace plan that was considered quite a good plan, except the Israelis wouldn't accept it. And they had a lot of, that's what gave them some credibility in the Arab world, is their support for the Palestinians. But when the US was negotiating with Iran, the Israelis and the Saudis discovered they had something very important in common. And with the old adage of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, they started meeting together, and now they are openly meeting together, and they are openly working to try to squash this Iran nuclear deal with a new presidency. So I think it's very dangerous. In the meantime, Palestinians feel that they've been sort of dumped, and that this relationship is going to continue, includes a sharing of military technology. So it's a very dangerous coming together.
How do you sleep at night?
Well, I think that we do, just as Barbie said, have a lot of hopeful things that are happening everywhere. We can dwell on the bad, or we can look at the good. I see just a tiny little incident of what happened to me last night, and people coming and smashing our windows and breaking in and taking our stuff. We ended up having a wonderful gathering of the community afterwards to sit and talk about, was this a hate crime, wasn't it a hate crime, and even whatever it was, how do we come together and protect the mosque? How do we come together and make sure that the immigrant community in Fresno feels safe? And it's very beautiful, you know, when you come together as a community, even if it's coming out of a very negative thing. So I think just recognizing that it is community that gives us inspiration, that helps us sleep at night, and that makes us get up in the morning ready to charge ahead.
Is anybody else
Wait,
wearing
No, go ahead.
We got,
That's good.
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask you. I see you have this upcoming Iraq trip. Maybe you could say a few words about that.
Well, we have two things. We have an Iraq tribunal coming up December 1st and 2nd. And that is because we've been petitioning President Obama to do what they did in the UK, which is do an investigation of what happened around the Iraq invasion, why it happened, and who was responsible. And that's this very massive Chilcote report that was done in the UK. Unfortunately, it didn't get the kind of momentum because it happened at the time of the Brexit vote, and that put everything in people in a different space. But we have not been able to get our government to do anything similar, so we're doing our own People's Tribunal and getting all kinds of fantastic people who are either by video or by written or coming to Washington, D.C. to collect all this information. We got Barbara Lee to agree that it would all be entered into congressional record, and that is happening December 1st and 2nd. And then we are doing a trip to the northern part of Iraq, which is the safer part right now, because we think it's just important to not forget there is a country out there that, because of our invasion, continues to suffer tremendously, and we bear such a great responsibility for that.
That should be interesting.
We also have the requirement, really, the obligation to pressure Obama in these remaining days. To close Guantanamo for something like fewer than 70 days now, and he has the ability to do that. There's still 60 or 61 prisoners who are still there, and God help them when Trump takes power, because it's gonna be my but Obama
Yes.
could do it if we pressure.
Yes, he could, and, we've been part of a coalition that has not stopped with the pressure on Guantanamo, including going there twice, and then going to meet with the families whose loved ones are still in Guantanamo, most of them from Yemen. And it is just another one of those mind-boggling things to think that we could keep people behind bars for close to like 15 years now,
Without
without
charge.
trial and without charges. And,
The other thing that he needs to be pressured on is releasing people like Leonard Peltier, which would be
Maria.
Maria.
yes.
Could you give us a quick insight into the Houthi Saudi misunderstanding?
Yeah. So the issue in Yemen, Yemen used to be two countries. It used to be North Yemen and the South Yemen. The South Yemen was actually a socialist country, but that fell apart when the Soviet Union fell apart. And so there have been different tribes, different factions within Yemen, and at the time of the Arab Spring, there was an uprising that got rid of the dictator in power at the time, Ali Abdullah Saleh, and there was a transition period that was called, with his vice president Hadi was going to be in power just for the transition period. They actually held an election with him as the only one running, and it was specifically for this transition. In the meantime, they tried very hard to have, in fact I visited it, it seemed really wonderful at the time, a gathering of all different kinds of people to come together to talk about how they can be sharing power. The Houthis felt like this was not going to result in something that was going to give them their fair share of power, and so they took up arms, and they then made an alliance with some of the people in the military, and before you know it, they had taken over the capital. They made then a very strange alliance with the former dictator, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who they are now working with. So part of the army, the former dictator, and the Houthis. Meanwhile, against the Hadi, who was in power as a transition, he took refuge in Saudi Arabia. And he said, we need Saudi support. And that's when the Saudis came in. And so the Houthis are really an indigenous group. The Saudis always exaggerated the role of Iran in this conflict. But it was their justification for getting involved, and it has been documented by the UN and every major human rights organization that the majority of the deaths and destruction is all coming from the bombing campaigns, and that's coming from Saudi Arabia.
Could we digress a little to Palestine? If
Yeah.
it's okay to you? I think one reason for the subsidization of the Palestinian national struggle and it's being so effectively sidetracked is because of the lack of Palestinian unity as a result of the betrayal by Abbas and the Palestinian Authority that he leads. What are the prospects, if any, that the Palestinians could regain and reestablish national unity in order to reinvigorate Israel?
I don't know that. Does anybody else want to answer that?
When we were there with interfaith peace builders, the theme of the tour was activists. We met activists everywhere. They all seemed to think that leadership everywhere was corrupt and that they had to work in communities.
Well, let me add something to that, which is the pernicious role that the U.S. has played because you might have seen one of the most disgusting pieces of information that came out during this campaign was from a tape that Hillary Clinton had made when she spoke to a Jewish group in 2006. And she said, it was a terrible mistake to push elections in Palestine. We made a very big mistake, we should have never done it, and if we were going to push it, we should have made sure we knew who was going to win those elections. So that was at the time that Hamas won. And the US did not respect that and helped create these divisions. Elections are not for us to determine the winner. The leadership of another country, whether it's the Hamas in Gaza or whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, if the people voted in free and fair elections, which these were determined to be, that should be what the international community accepts. So we have been playing a very devious role in trying to give support to the more pro-US, pro-Western quote, leaders in Palestine, which has made them seem, because they are, corrupt in the eyes of their own people. And then Palestinians, when they see that they're not even allowed to have the leaders that they vote for, of course that makes them very cynical about the democratic process. And it's similar to Saudi Arabia when people say, where are the real leaders, where are the non-violent leaders, where are the Gandhis? They're in prison.
I know you were in Egypt during the revolution. What is your take in Saudi Arabia and the Muslim Brotherhood, and where do you think the Muslim Brotherhood would have gone if they maintained power?
Well, it's very strange because, you know, it's not an easy thing to say it's all about Sunni and Shia, because the Muslim Brotherhood is Sunni and the Saudis are Sunni. You would think they would be supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. They're both religious, but they don't. The Saudi rulers do not like the Muslim Brotherhood, and one of the main reasons is that the Muslim Brotherhood agrees to go into the electoral process and be part of that democratic process, where the Saudis are like, no, this is preordained by God, we don't go to elections to get elected. The Saudis were not supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood, in fact, just the opposite. They were supportive of the coup that led to the death of thousands of people who were peacefully sitting in, and ended in the imprisonment of 40,000 people. And this corrupt Sisi regime is something that these Saudis have invested in the last 2 years, $25 billion. The U.S. was giving $1 billion a year, and the U.S. was trying to, quote, or said it was trying to use its leverage to, get some human rights concessions. And the Egyptians basically said, we don't need your $1 billion, we're getting way more than that from the Saudis.
Follow up on that, do you think the American government green-lighted the overthrow of democratic power there? Or do you think it was taken by surprise?
I don't know. I think we know that the U.S. government never supported or wanted the Morsi regime, and I'm sure there was some covert activities going on. When the coup happened, John Kerry was Secretary of State, and we were protesting and confronting John Kerry all over the place, and then meeting with the staff of the key senators and congresspeople. And basically what they said to us is that the $1 billion that the U.S. gives to Egypt, just like the now going to be $3.8 billion to Israel, don't really go to Israel and Egypt. They go to U.S. weapons manufacturers. And this is a subsidy to the U.S. weapons business. And no matter what was happening in Egypt, the U.S. government had already made contracts with the U.S. weapons companies that had to be fulfilled. And so there was no way to cut that because we were told you can't cut the contracts that you've made with the weapons manufacturers. You know, you can cut workers' pensions, you can cut all kinds of deals you've made with everybody else, but you can't violate those weapons manufacturers' contracts.
Yeah, it's definitely a sacred.
Yeah, so it doesn't come back down to us.
I just want to share that one of the leaders in the April 6 movement.
And you might want to explain what that is, the
April
secular.
6, yeah, April 6 movement was one of the national movements that preceded the uprising.
thing.
And this gentleman, Ahmad Salahi, has been a political refugee living in San Francisco for the last 3 years. So maybe the San Jose Peace and Justice Center now want to invite him to come and give a talk.
He's been
Oh,
Yes, give him a talk.
years.
You know, the Egyptian economy is really bad right now. It's really, and there have been some demonstrations in Egypt these days against the economic shortages that are happening. But it has certainly had an impact on Sisi's popularity.
Well, I know Medea has another talk to give this afternoon later in San Francisco, and then even later tonight in Berkeley.
Wow.
So we really appreciate her being here today.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing the center and all similar centers around the country really double, triple, quadruple in size as the things gear up in Washington, D.C. And I'll take a deep breath and say, we got even more work to do out there. And thank you
We
so
have a
much.
donation box back there. We're gonna split the Peace Center expenses with helping pay for Medea's trip expenses. So please